welcome to Five Rivers Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Nicole Avena, neuroscientist and author. And Dr. Avena, I must tell you, I am super excited to get a chance to speak with you. I have followed your work. I've seen some of the videos that you've done on social media. I saw the TED Talk; it was incredible. So thank you for all the work that you've done in this space and continue to guide people in the right direction. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here.
So you've been a pioneer in showing how sugar doesn't just affect your body; it changes how our brain behaves. Why are we wired to crave sweetness, for lack of a better term?
Well, it's really interesting when you look at the evolutionary history of humans. We actually were designed to crave things that are sweet because in nature, if you think about it, things that are sweet are usually good for us. So, for example, if our ancestors were, wandering the forest and looking for berries to eat, you would want to eat the berries that were ripe and tasted sweet. Those are the ones that are safe and good for you and going to be nutritious and have calories and sugar. You wouldn't want to eat the ones that were sour, the ones that fell to the forest floor that had mold on them. Those are the ones that are going to make you sick. And, beyond just sort of our environment, even when we're born, the very first thing that most babies taste is breast milk, and that tastes sweet. And so we have this sort of biological propensity to code things that are sweet as being safe. And that may have served us very, very well for thousands of years. But, when we look at our modern food environment, it's actually a detriment to us because we have this craving for sweet and this desire to eat things that are sweet. But the sweets these days are very different than the ones that we were evolutionarily brought up to be attracted to.
So from the evolutionary perspective to where we are right now, how has the mismatch, if you will, between the natural sugars you talked about, or fruits, and from an ancient perspective, and current, how has that mismatch sort of rewired our response, our brain, our reaction?
Yeah, it's interesting because we still have those primitive brains. Even though we've evolved, we really haven't evolved that much. I think our environment's evolved a lot faster than our brains have. So we haven't been able to adapt to our changing environment when it comes to our food. And so that's why it's really hard to resist these different types of ultra processed foods, these sweets, these convenience foods that basically are now a staple in the American diet. And so, we have that desire to, overeat the berry bush when we stumble upon it in the forest, because we don't know when we're getting a berry bush again, right? We don't know when it's going to be in season again, right? I mean, so we would have access to sweets, in a way that was controlled in such that we didn't have this unlimited access to them. So it was okay to overindulge and to overeat. But nowadays it's not. And now we see that, so much of our food supply is really just inundated with a lot of these types of foods that we know are bad for our health, because not only is it just eating too much of this refined sugar, but it's also the health ramifications that come along with that. So in addition to things like obesity, we also see increased rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, really just a variety of different medical complications that we now are seeing are in many ways rooted in the poor diet that we're consuming.
So would you say, from a biological perspective and chemical reactions within the body, for example, and we've done some research on this as well. I think there are plenty of papers out there, but is there a tie-in between the dopamine effect, if you will, and the consumption of sugar when it comes to people's sort of addiction, if you will, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. So way back when I was a graduate student, I was a grad student at Princeton, and I was fresh there, just started. And when I was meeting with my advisor about what I was going to be doing for my dissertation for my PhD, we started talking about this idea of, how come so many people are struggling with obesity, even though there's lots of advice telling people don't overeat, don't eat too much, junk food. And so we started down this path of asking the question, well, can sugar be addictive? And
Mm,
so really that was one of our first studies, was to see if when we give laboratory animals, in this case,
mm,
sugar, does it cause an increase in dopamine release? And what we found was that yes, it did. And that increase in dopamine release was more like what you'd expect to see with a drug. One of the things that makes drugs so different than food is that every time somebody uses a drug of abuse like nicotine, morphine,
mm,
cocaine, you name it, it releases dopamine in the reward related regions of the brain. That's really the
got it.
hallmark of drug use. Food doesn't do that. When you eat food, it doesn't typically release dopamine in those reward regions. It's really only the very first time you eat a new food. And that has more to do
Mm,
with dopamine signaling as a part of the learning process, and just, making sure that this food doesn't make us sick and being aware of our surroundings. But
mm,
once you're accustomed to eating foods, they don't typically release dopamine. But when you take high sugar foods, that's a very different story. It releases dopamine like a drug. And so that was really the beginning of our understanding of this concept of sugar addiction and food addiction,
mm,
and showing from a neurochemical standpoint, at least. And we've, combined that study with lots of others that we've conducted and others have conducted that have contributed to the other aspects of addiction that can emerge in response to food, to really kind of paint this picture of, yeah, well, it does seem as if sugar can produce signs of addiction. And when you think about that in our modern food environment and all the sugar rich foods we have and all the people that are struggling to regulate their food intake, it explains a lot in terms of why people struggle with that.
yeah. It's interesting you say that, because to us, what we've seen with a lot of our members, with the folks that we work to, is the redefinition a little bit too, right? That it's not necessarily just a weakness. It is the wiring that you talked about. It is the response to something that's naturally inherent to human beings, and working with them to help them identify, understand, and, for lack of a better term, give themselves a little grace to say, hey, there are different ways to get to it. There are different ways to solve the problem, but it's not just a simple matter of, man, I am so weak, I can't stay away from sugar. Well, there's an underlying current there underneath that you have to get to the bottom of it. So I truly find this very fascinating. To your point earlier too, that the response, the body's response, and the dopamine receptors and those firing off, uh, like a drug,
Mhm.
right? And obviously the food industry, the industry that uses a lot of sugar and processed foods and things like that, they've done a phenomenal job of making sure they make it worse and worse and worse, and take the labels and make it so much more confusing for people to just get it right off the bat to say, no, 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 this is not good for me. Time out. This is going to cause me an issue, or it is going to help make me go down a path that is not sustainable or adverse for me. And it's frustrating.
Mm.
Our hijacked brains, for lack of a better term, have no other way but to really dig deep and figure out how we can get over this. So in theory, I mean, that what I was trying to explain, or what I was trying to confirm, is that it's a neurochemical surge. Would that be accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're saying about, the fact that it's not a willpower issue, it's not a moral failing because
Mm,
people can't control their food intake. I think that's really important for people to learn about and to understand. That's why I really enjoy talking about the research and the science that's gone on
yeah.
in this space, because I think when people hear that, it does help them to see that,
Mm,
yeah, when I'm reaching, for those treats and the cakes or whatever it might be, it's actually my brain having this like firework display in response to the packaging, the, pretty colors, the
right.
memory of the taste of those foods. That's all happening in your brain, and it's driving you to then want to eat more and more of it. And
Yeah.
I do think that the food company in general has done a really good job of still convincing us that it's our fault, and telling us that, well, you got to exercise more, and, well, you should just eat it in moderation. Like,
Yeah.
we have the serving size is like, you know, 7.5 chips, and like who's going to eat 7.5 chips? Like nobody counts these things out. So there's been a lot of, I think, um, you know, discussions in the food industry around like, okay, yeah, we're trying to get ahead of this. We want to make it look like we're, doing everything we can to protect our customers and keep them healthy. But, the work that they're doing, I don't think is actually working in terms of helping people
Yeah.
to make better choices. I think if anything, like you said a few minutes ago, it's just adding to the confusion, and it's really not being as transparent as they need to be. If you go to other countries, um, you'll see warning labels on
Yep.
processed foods. If you go to Mexico, some
Mhm.
European countries are starting to do it now. Um, and again, I'm not saying that the warning labels are going to cure us of all of our
Right.
problems, but it does give pause. And I think it does, just like with tobacco products, like it helps you to kind of maybe think twice before you
Yeah.
decide that you're going to start using that, or you're going to use a lot of it, or buy it, or bring it in your home. So I do think that there's more that can be done to help people to kind of get rid of a lot of the confusion and the ambiguity around, whether or not these foods are actually healthy for us or not.
Yeah, and I think the food industry has done a phenomenal job of exploiting, that messaging,
Hmm.
right? And they're masters in communication. That's the way I
Yeah.
see it. The way they position themselves, the way they call healthy alternatives.